We're going to talk now about how we're going to do the quality check for the upper setting, the setting of the upper teeth. First of all, when we do these quality checks, we do them at an early stage while we're doing the setting. We don't wait until we have the full arches set and then we begin adjusting tooth by tooth. It's preferred to begin this work at the beginning. Whenever you add a tooth, make sure that these rules apply. So what do we check when we are working? Although we're setting using a glass slab, and at all times we are adding the base plate, we're putting the base plate on the glass slab. And we're checking according to the glass slab the relations. But we want to note that the glass slab is representing actually the lower wax rim. Because when we began setting, we made sure that the upper and lower wax rims were in total contact. So whenever I add a tooth here, make sure you go back and put the base plate on the articulator, close it, make sure that the pen is still on the table, touching the table, and the wax rims are still in contact. If we don't have the wax rims in contact, what might have happened that we have set one of the teeth in the upper jaw high. So we need, whenever we're setting, to go back and check the other side of the wax is total contact and the pen is touching the table. So this is the first check we do. I also check the midlines. So we can bring a ruler and check that the midlines, the cast to cast midlines are coinciding with the teeth. We have not, the incisal pen should have been used in the articulator, but you might have some problems with your articulator. We just want to make sure that the cast to cast midlines are coinciding. This is how we mounted the casts in the beginning, and they should be coinciding with the midline of the pen and the midline of the jig in the beginning where we have mounted. So all of these lines coincide, but sometimes looking far away from the incisal pen to the teeth will sometimes cause some confusion, so it's better to put something closer to the teeth and compare it with. So we are checking the midlines are correct. Then we check that our setting is inside the incisal arch, the arch lines. When we set teeth, the teeth position are determined by many reference points. We had the incisive papilla with a canine line explained in the lecture. We have that the anterior teeth should be 8 to 10 incisal edges of the teeth are 8 to 10 millimeters in front of the incisive papilla. For this we can use an incisive papillometer. But we also can check using vertical view on the cast in this direction that the teeth are not outside the base plate. So if we look vertically down in this direction, we should see that the arch of the teeth are with the arch of the base plate in the same line. So we don't go away, especially in the anterior area. In the molar area, we are allowed to have 1 or 2 millimeters inward movement of the teeth. The palatal cusps of upper teeth are coinciding with the lower ridge crest line. So if this is the lower crest, if we come closer and compare the position of the crest with the palatal cusp, we find that the cusps are over the center line over the crest of the ridge. So this is the crest line. If I can just, by the pencil, draw, let the pencil run over the crest, and this is the crest line. So the palatal cusps of the upper are over this line. We also have other reference lines, are the lines of lateral lines. So we have the arch line in the anterior area, we have the tips of the molar, canine, premolar, and molar on one line, we call it mid-buccal line, and then we have the posterior line where we have the cusps of the molar, mesial distal of the second molar, all are in one line, so this is another line. So these are called reference lines. We also have if you can look closely at the central fossa of the teeth, the central fossa of the teeth are all in one line. So let us revise those lines on the drawing here. So we always compare our setting with the lines. We have external lines, and we call this is the arch line of the anterior teeth. The teeth from canine to canine should follow this, the setting of the teeth should follow this line and be not more in terms looking at it. I could also notice that if I'm taking this out and even invert it and look at it from the side, when I see this is the sulcus recorded in the base plate, none of the teeth are appearing from behind the setting. So the teeth are set inside that arch line. The second line is this midline, canine, premolar, and molar, all in one line. We call this mid-buccal line. We call the final line posterior buccal line. It joins the mesial and distal of molar cusps in one line. So while we're setting the teeth, we take the teeth inwards slightly. And then after we had talked about the external lines, the line joining the fossa together is called midline of the fossa. And we have the line of the palatal surfaces of teeth all together. So although these are on two planes, the lines palatally should be the same. So all the teeth should be aligned palatally correctly. And the cusps of the upper, palatal upper cusps in these areas, the tips of the cusps, not the palatal outline, but the line joining the tips of each cusp of the upper is coinciding with the lower crest line. So if we invert this is the upper going down on the lower. We find that the palatal cusps of the upper are aligned in a way over exactly the mid of the crest of the lower. So this is our lines, reference lines. So after checking the base plate on the articulator, then looking at it from an occlusal view, now we're going to look at it in frontal and buccal views. So we're going to look and observe the occlusal plane. The occlusal plane is represented here if the lower articulator, if the articulator is present, what we call the occlusal plane is the plane where the upper meets the lower, and we call it an occlusal plane. Okay? So this line is called the occlusal plane. If I take the cast or the base plate outside the articulator and put it on my glass slab, now what represents the occlusal plane now is this glass slab. Okay? But whatever I am doing here, once I finalize the teeth position on this occlusal plane, I go and check it back on the articulator. So what are we looking in comparison with the occlusal plane? First of all, I have to look in front. This is the frontal view of teeth. When I want to look at them, I want to see that the midline is coinciding with the midline of the cast. The central incisors are placed on the occlusal plane perfectly. And once they are in this direction, we need to look at their angulation also in a moment. But let us just concentrate first of all which tooth is touching, which is not. So when I'm going to correct your work, I'm going to say centrals should be touching. Laterals should be a bit higher. So you can notice that the lateral is higher by 0.5 to 1 millimeter. And if I'm putting in the canine as well, when the canine is in, the canine is touching. So which teeth are touching the occlusal plane? So central is touching, lateral is higher than the occlusal plane, canine is touching. Now we go to the buccal view, looking at the teeth from side. The canine is touching, the buccal cusp of the premolar is touching, the palatal is not, should not be touching. The second premolar, both cusps are touching. For the first molar and second molar, both are not touching except the mesiopalatal of the upper. If we look from the inside, we're looking from back. If I look from this side on the occlusal, if I'm looking from this side, on the occlusal plane, I'm looking from the inside, I should see the first premolar not touching the glass slab. The second premolar palatal cusp is touching. For the 6, the only cusp touching is the mesiopalatal. The distal cusps are higher in occlusion to create what we call curve of Spee. So curve of Spee begins from tooth number 6. The mesiopalatal is touching. We go up and up and up to the 7. These cusps are all in one line when we set the teeth. So whenever you're setting the molar on the glass slab, suppose this is the molar. Whenever we set the molar on, first molar on the glass slab, we first put 4 cusps on. But then, when we want to shift, we shift distally, we raise it distally to make the curve of Spee, and then we raise it buccally to create what we call curve of Wilson. So the molar plane is curved distally and buccally. So if I'm looking from the buccal view on the molar, I should see part of the palatal cusps by the curve of Wilson, and the only cusp touching the occlusal plane should be the mesiopalatal. So revising, central is touching, lateral is not, canine is touching, buccal of the first, both cusps of the second premolar, and the mesiopalatal only of the molar are touching the cusp. Once we finalize which cusp is touching and not touching, we go back and check the angulation of teeth. For example, this central incisor can be touching while it's like this or like this or like this. So we need to look at the long axis. What is the long axis of the tooth? We also call it midfacial line. It is the line bisecting the tooth. It goes from the middle of the incisal edge to the middle of the cervical outline of the tooth, of the crown, the clinical crown. So this midline for the central incisor should be shifted by a degree to the right, around 5 degrees. So we don't place the central long axis of the tooth upright. We slightly rotate it distally. Once we achieve this, the incisal edge will be flat on the occlusal plane. If we put it upright, you will find that the mesial of the tooth is touching, the distal is raised. So automatically, when you incline the tooth in the correct inclination, the incisal edge becomes horizontal with the occlusal plane. The lateral, for the lateral, it's tilted more to the distal, more than the central, around 10 to 15 degrees. So it's more tilted to the distal. The canine has 2 options. You can put the canine upright. I'm looking now between buccal and frontal view. I'm looking directly at the canine. I have 2 options for setting up the canine. I have the first option where I could put it upright, or I could tilt it slightly distally. So 2 options for the canine setting. The premolar is upright. Both premolars are upright. But then the molar and the second molar are a bit tilted to the mesial by putting them into curve of Spee, because the tooth is not flat on the occlusal plane. We have raised the distal. This makes the tooth slightly angulated mesially in the molar and the second molar. So this side, it's tilted towards the mesial. This is what we call the long axis of the tooth. Once we have this finalized, the last point is the root angulation of the teeth. If I look closely at the teeth, in the root angulation, I find that the central should be tilted labially a bit. The root is depressed. So if the incisal edges are on the arch lines that we explained, the external arch line, the roots are not in the same level. So we depress the root of the central slightly. We depress the root of the lateral even more. We make the root of the canine up, and this is the canine upright. So the root is prominent. The lateral is depressed. The central is a bit prominent. So to produce what we call labial inclination. So this is the central. This is the lateral, even more inclined. We're talking about the root, not the long axis here. We're looking at the proximal view, and this is the root position, and the root is depressed more. And once we place the canine in, we make it prominent. And if we look at it from the frontal view, we have this prominence of the canine. So this is how we judge your work. So let's revise the work. First, let's go through all points. We first judge the work on the articulator. The pen is touching, the occlusal plane is flat, and the wax are touching each other. On the other side, we have the midlines coinciding. Then we take the upper out. We judge the external arch lines. We take an occlusal view. Judge the external outlines, the arch, the mid-buccal, and the posterior buccal lines. We compare the palatal line. We compare the cusp line, the palatal cusp line with the lower. We compare line. So we have multiple lines to compare occlusally. Then we put that work on the glass slab, and then we compare the contacts, which tooth is contact and which is not. Then we judge your angulation of the teeth, and then judge the root position of the teeth. And once you have all that finalized, you will have your setting correct. Thank you. We will have 4 tables with 4 technicians there, and each technician will have 2 criteria to judge. Once you have done approval for your work from all 4 tables, you are ready to come in and submit the upper and begin with the setting of the lower. So please follow the approval sheet that you will get and have distributed for you. Thank you.